You're now live.
We are now live and I'm getting up the agenda. This is Senate Finance. Okay, things are still loading slowly. I thought we'd fix that problem, but it's not. Okay, so today we're going to go back and take a look at S212, and this is income-based education funding. And first on the agenda, if I get this notice out of the way, is Stephanie Yu, Deputy Director of Public Assets. So Stephanie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thanks for having me again. So I'm Stephanie Yu, the Deputy Director of Public Assets Institute, and just have a couple points I think I want to make. When I came in a couple of weeks ago to talk about pupil weighting and cost equity payments, I mentioned that this month marks the 25th anniversary of the Brigham decision, which led to the transformation of our school funding system.
Yes.
So we currently have these two parallel systems for how Vermont residents pay their school taxes, one based on household income and one based on property value. And earlier in that history, in 1994, the House actually passed a fully income-based school funding system for residents that was rejected by the Senate. But even before that, we've had some form of income adjustments. So in 1970, we began a rebate program for older Vermonters with fixed incomes and rising property values. And in 1973, we expanded that program to low-income Vermonters. And then, of course, Act 60 in 1997 greatly expanded it, more than tripling the number of taxpayers who are paying their school taxes based on income. So that now most Vermonters pay some or all of their school taxes based on income. So I think what you're talking about is really sort of the next step in the evolution of our school funding system that began 50 years ago. And from our perspective, moving to income-based school taxes makes sense because it's fair. It means that all Vermont residents pay on the same basis, and high-income Vermonters would contribute at least the same rate as low and middle-income Vermonters. It's also a lot simpler. It would eliminate a lot of what makes the system complicated now, the common level of appraisal, the lag in the property tax adjustment, the two rates, the two yields. And it would allow many taxpayers, to spread out their school taxes over the year, rather than being faced with one or two big bills a couple times a year. So the way we see the two big problems with this system now are that it's complicated and regressive. Trying to force a property tax to act like an income tax means that we're adding a lot of tweaks and making it more complicated, both for voters to follow and for local and state government to administer. One of the strengths of the school funding system, I think, is the direct democracy decision-making system, which means that voters in each community are deciding each year how much to spend on their schools. So that means that the tax consequences of their decision should be easy to understand, but right now they really aren't. And the regressivity of the system is an equity issue. People with the highest incomes are paying the lowest share of their income in school taxes. Low and middle income people are spending an average of about 2.6% of their income. Those making $1 million or more are paying less than a fifth of that, about 0.5%. So income-based school taxes would go a long way towards solving both of these problems. And the Tax Structure Commission took up this question, as I'm sure you've seen, about how to improve the system, and concluded that moving all residents to income-based school taxes would be the fairest system. I think, and I think they started from the premise that, and Commissioner Brighton can speak more to this, but started from the premise that one system was better than this hybrid system, that moving to all one or all the other made sense. And they really wanted to understand which one was the better idea, a property-based system or an income-based system. And again, I think what we have now started as a property tax, and then we sort of layered income sensitivity on top of it, which made it messier and messier. But it's essentially an income-based adjustment so that people can afford their school taxes. And I think one of the most important things that the commission dug into, the findings that they had, was that home value is not a good measure of ability to pay. At the low end, what you have is that property values might exceed a family's net worth because they owe a lot on their mortgage and they have few other assets. And then at the high end, the primary residence is a small slice of their total net worth. So in neither case is property value a good measure of their ability to pay. And ultimately, you're paying your taxes out of your income and not your property. That's sort of our sort of high level conceptual sort of ideas about why it makes sense to move to income-based taxes. But I think there's also some process stuff in this bill that's really important. The Education Fund Advisory Committee is a good idea. I think a lot of the issues that create confusion and frustration with the school funding system, both for policymakers and for voters, are kind of the result of a lack of coordinated system management. As you are all too well aware, after the last few weeks, school finance has many moving parts that affect the taxes that Vermonters pay in each school district. And so changing one part of the system is going to affect the other parts. So it's helpful to have that technical analysis of the education fund performed outside of the political process, gives you the information and analysis you need to make timely decisions. And I think across the board, it increases trust in the system, both again, among the information that legislators are getting, but also for voters. And it allows for a more long-term view of the fund rather than sort of year-to-year updates and focusing on, any given year's ed fund outlook. And I think it would make it easier for the legislature to go back to setting the yield in January, which would also make things clearer and easier for school districts as they're finalizing their budgets and for voters to decide on them. So, I think we have this solid education funding system with this baseline level of statewide equity, both for students and taxpayers, and we balance it with local control over school budgets. It's definitely complicated. It can be made simpler. But it is a lot more equitable than those of other states. And I think this is another step in sort of improving that equity. There's a lot of overlap in these two issues in how you're in both the pupil weighting and cost equity discussion and the income-based school taxes because of how they both impact students and voters. There's a close relationship, right, between what towns pay, what voters pay, and what they get out of the system. That being said, I think a useful way to think about this is that income-based taxes are correcting a current unfairness in who pays. Instead of higher income Vermonters paying a smaller share, than low and middle incomes, everyone would pay at least the same. But then the pupil weighting and cost equity discussion is really about where the money goes, making sure all kids have the resources that they need through whatever mechanism you land on. But again, those two things are tied closely together in our system, but that is sort of the two aspects of the system I think that you're looking at. So I think they're both important improvements, and it would be great if we could make progress on both of them this year.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any backup data that you could share with the committee?
So we did put together a lot of analysis in terms of sort of the regressivity of the system in terms of the sort of steps you need to go through. I'm happy to share handouts that we presented.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
And the task force. Mm-hmm.
All right. The other question I have, my concern is right now, the income tax is the only source that the general fund has to go to. So if we essentially do away with the property tax and pay for schools on the income tax, do you have any research as to what is the total taxing capacity? If we do this, unless we want to raise taxes on, income for all Vermonters, what's the excess taxing capacity at that top end that we're all going after, and how much of it would this proposal use up?
So I think there's a couple of different questions in there that I can kind of split out if you don't mind. So the first one is what's the taxing capacity at the top end? Yeah. And the way that we think about this is, so personal income in the state, total personal income grows pretty much every year, right? This is sort of another big measure of big sort of macroeconomic measure of what's happening. And so we're at, I think, around 35, 36 billion. Now, some of that growth in the last year had to do with some of the COVID relief transfer money and that kind of thing. But even during the Great Recession, even during economic downturns, what we saw is that total pot keep growing, right? And so when we think about that, so right now we collect around 11, 12, 13% of total personal income in state taxes, state and local taxes. So for every percentage point, it's about, give or take, $300 million, right? So I think the question is, at various points sort of in the state's history, we've collected a larger share of that total personal income. So if we went to 14, 15% of that total personal income, that again, for each percentage point, somewhere in the neighborhood of $300 to $400 million. So I think that the question is less about what's the excess capacity at the top and more about how that collection is distributed sort of overall. So I think the capacity is there. It keeps growing, right? Personal income keeps growing. The capacity is there. So again, another percentage point buys you a fair amount, and you're still talking about 14, 15% of total personal income. But the distribution of it, which is sort of what this proposal gets to, I think is the key part. Right now, higher income Vermonters are paying a lower share than lower middle income
property, but
Right.
higher income Vermonters are paying a much larger share of the income tax. Is it
because they have a larger
10%?
share of the
Is
income.
it something like 4% pay 50% of the total income revenue, or maybe it's 10% pay 50% of the total? So they're paying a higher percentage in income, and we're the second most graduated, progressive tax system. So I'm just wondering how those balance out.
Right. And I think Commissioner Brighton is going to get into some of the detailed analysis of some of this stuff, but I will say that it's because they have a larger share of the income that total personal income is obviously not evenly distributed per capita, right? A lot of it is concentrated at the top. And so the total share of income that group has, what is collected reflects the share of their income that they have, not the share of taxpayers that are in that group. But the other point, I think the other part of your question that maybe I didn't get to was this question of sort of the mix of revenue in the state. And I'm happy to show, we presented in the task force, moving to income-based school taxes only shifts a small share of the ed fund from a property base to an income base. Relatively speaking, we're in the $150, $200 million range of a $1.5, $1.8 billion fund. So overall, the mix of state revenues doesn't change that significantly. I can pull up the exact numbers. But I think it went from, 28% to 31%, somewhere in that ballpark. It's not a huge difference in terms of the overall mix of revenue in the state and what the base is for those for the revenue.
Has any other state done away with the property tax and gone all the income?
Well, there's still property taxes. First of all, a lot of other states don't have a statewide property tax. Their property taxes.
We're the only one that does.
Right. So we'd still have local property taxes, right? We'd still have the municipal side of the property taxes. We'd also still have all the non-residential property taxes. This is just the residential slice. So we still have a significant amount of property taxes in the state. But to your question, I don't think that there's any other state that bases school taxes entirely on income for residents.
Okay. So nowhere we can look. All right. Senator Pearson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple questions, Steph. There's no other state that has a statewide funding system of any kind, right, in terms of schools?
Hawaii does, but they're the only other one, and it operates a little bit differently.
Okay. And then you said something that I hadn't heard of before, that doing this kind of proposal would eliminate the CLA, common level of appraisal. Is that true, or is that only for does the CLA apply to commercial properties?
Right. So because it's a town by town adjustment, it's not going to apply to the non-residential statewide rate. So it's only that residential piece, right?
But would it still exist for valuation of commercial properties? That's what I'm trying to ask.
I don't know the answer to that question. That's a good question. I'd have to look into it. It's not something
I see Deb Brighton nodding.
Probably knows the answer.
We'll ask her for that. The last question I have is sort of, I'm curious about the points the chair's brought up, and I think it's probably widely held. Well, I don't mean to speak for her, but that it would be a fairly common sentiment in the legislature is this capacity question, and if we sort of make this leap, do we therefore limit our ability to generate revenue if we have some kind of downturn or need revenue in the future? And I think that's, of course, a very important question for us to understand. And also we have to balance it with whether or not what kind of tax structure we have. Do we want a regressive tax structure, a progressive tax structure, or something in between? We have as a policy set an admirably progressive income tax, but and I think usually that's celebrated. But when it comes to the school tax, it's not the case, not at all. It's quite regressive the way, even though we've income sensitized it. And so were we to make this change, could you talk about the tax burden that Vermonters are paying? Would this go all the way to saying our tax burden is progressive? Or does this say, after we do this with the income tax and this, but you still have the sales tax, so the tax burden would be still mixed? Or I'm trying to understand, does this, so I'm interested in a progressive tax system across the board. I don't think it's a principle that we should apply to some of our tax burden, but not others. But I don't think, as important as I think this change is, I guess I'm curious to know what it means overall to our entire tax burden that Vermonters face. Does it get us just better? Does it get us to an entirely progressive system, or what's your reaction?
So I think, so it's a good question. So you're right in saying we have this very progressive income tax, a sales tax that's flat ends up being regressive, right? Because people have to buy a certain amount of goods. And so lower income people end up paying a larger share in sales tax. And then the property tax is kind of bumpy because we have this income sensitivity, because we have this income-based adjustment. It's not regressive all the way through, right? So we're sort of already making this adjustment at the low income end, but it becomes regressive once you get past that income sensitivity piece. So this would sort of lift up that other side and make the higher side and make that the whole school tax piece progressive. So I think a lot of the work, we work a lot with ITEP, who does this sort of big who pays report by state every year. You may have seen it, and I'm happy to
Can you tell us who that is?
The Institute for Taxation and Economic Policy is what
Okay.
ITEP stands for. And they do a lot of this work at the state level. And every couple of years, they release this report on state taxes, but it's looking at state and local taxes combined. So I think you're still going to have sort of some of the regressivity effects of the municipal piece of the property tax. So, but if you're just focused on the state system, I think overall, does it completely offset the sales tax regressivity? I don't know. I'd have to look closely at sort of those numbers, but it definitely goes a long way in that direction. So I think that was part of your question. I think there was another part of your question that I wanted to respond to, and I'm kind of lost it for a second there, but you could remind me if there's something.
Well, I think that's what I was after was that question. So I'm sorry if I bumbled through my question. So maybe that's why it's confusing.
No, you're fine. I think I did want to get to the first part, which was the part that the chair brought up, was this question of sort of, are we using up the capacity? And I think I come back to this question of personal income keeps growing, but it doesn't grow. Again, it doesn't sort of grow steadily across the income spectrum, right? It tends to be concentrated and be growing faster at the top. That's true in Vermont. It's been true in Vermont for a number of decades, really, but we've seen, that sort of accelerate over the last 20 years. So I think the question is, does your system keep up with where the money's going? More than, are we using up the burden, are we using up capacity? The question is, are we where we need to be in terms of how the system is designed?
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Senator McDonald.
Madam Chair, we've been sort of in this area of discussion 3 or 4 times already this session, and I've asked in each one of these times if JFO would bring us up to date on what percentage of Vermonters are paying their school taxes based on income. And we have yet to get an answer back what it was last year, the year before, and what it's projected to be next year. Such information would be helpful in these deliberations.
Okay. we will send that. I thought we had heard that, but we will ask them again. Okay, any other questions for Ms. Yu? Senator Hardy.
I just wanted to respond quickly to Senator McDonald. That's in the pupil weighting task force report. They've answered that question before, but you can certainly ask them again. I think it's around 78%, if I remember, but I can pull it up and get that.
That is my recollection, but any other questions? If not, I'm going to move on to Karen Horn.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Karen Horn with the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, and thank you for having me this afternoon. We have supported moving from a homestead property education tax to a homestead income-based education tax for quite some time. Our board endorsed both the recommendations of the pupil factor weighting report and those of the tax structure commission last year. I did write about this for our legislative report this week, and the Public Assets Institute actually had a graphic that speaks to the issue of the number of homeowners who are paying homestead taxes based on income, which is 2/3, versus homeowners paying based on property value, which is 1/3. I think that's also information that's provided in the Tax Structure Commission report. I see that you're going to hear from Deb Brighton in a few moments, and she made a presentation to the Ways and Means Committee yesterday, which contained a lot of information about what it would look like if you actually did move entirely to income taxes for homestead education taxes. We don't think it's that much of a leap, given the number of people who are already paying based on income. So, and we've, as I said earlier, we've supported it for quite a few years. I think it might be a bit of a heavy lift to move there this year at the same time that you're implementing the pupil weighting factors, the new pupil weights. But that's where we are. And I have relied on the analysis done by the Tax Structure Commission and Deb Brighton for my information on these issues for quite a few years also. There isn't anybody better than Deb Brighton to do that analysis.
Okay, Karen, unless things have changed, I remember fighting the statewide property tax. And unless things have changed a lot, towns have always had a difficult time. I think the standard breakdown was 2/3 of the tax money went to the schools. That may have changed, but what's the likelihood that towns would hold their tax rates steady if people are used to paying, a certain amount, and suddenly 2/3 of that cost is taken away? What is the likelihood that the municipal governments, which I think we've said are regressive, or regressive taxation, would increase their spending?
Well, I think that to be realistic, municipal governments likely would increase their spending somewhat. It's the only revenue source that towns have, unless they have a local option tax. And I guess we don't want to talk about that today, but
Well, that might go away too.
Thank you for your support of local option taxes in the past.
Uphill battle, so.
Right. if you look at what's happening with municipal budgets this year, given the increase in costs for supplies, for materials, for retaining qualified personnel, budgets are going up at the municipal level. And I think that's just a fact of life when you've got one revenue source.
Right. And there are some towns where the municipal actually is larger than the school budget. I have one.
Yeah, it's generally speaking the cities, and I don't know if it's all the cities, but because you provide those, a wide variety of services that most municipalities don't.
Right. Okay, questions for Deb? I am not seeing any. Okay, I'm going to go on to Jordan Gianconia from Vermont Business for Social Responsibility. Welcome. I don't know that you've been to the committee before. So just introduce yourself for the record and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and great to see y'all. I've been in front of this committee but one time, and it was pre-COVID, which feels like a small lifetime ago. And I think
I was going to say that was prehistory.
old history, and I was on crutches back then too, so different ball game. Well, thanks as always. Thank you all for the opportunity to offer comments on S212, and certainly appreciate the efforts of this committee and your clear recognition of just the critical role that quality education plays in creating a just, equitable, and Vermont economy. So for the record, I'm Jordan Gianconia, Public Policy Manager with Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility. We are a statewide nonprofit business association with a mission to leverage the power of businesses for positive social and environmental change. And to give you a sense of sort of a breakdown of our membership, in total, we typically fluctuate between about 650 and 700 members on an annual basis. About 35% of those employ 10 full-time employees or less, 65% employ 50 full-time employees, and about 6% employ 300 or more. So for years and years, Vermont or VBSR has really held that a strong education system is essential for a strong economy. And there's a host of and there are very few mechanisms effective as the public education system, increasing personal and intergenerational wealth, addressing poverty and crime, and also equipping the future workforce with the skills and knowledge that they need to succeed. So across the board, states that have made significant investments in education as a workforce development tool have much higher median family incomes, higher employee productivity, and also continues to help create a longer term effect in terms of increasing state tax revenues through boosted wages and opportunities for workers. So the current numbers right now on the national level, U.S. worker with a high school diploma, they earn about $20,000 a year, which is about $10,000 less than someone who graduated high school. And then workers with bachelor's degrees earn about $55,000 a year. So increased worker earnings grow our tax base, and as a result, reduce pressure on our tax rates. So overall, again, maintain that a strong educational system strengthens Vermont businesses as well, trains highly qualified workers with skills that match the needs of their employers, and allows our businesses to really succeed and grow and relate, and again, lead to the creation of additional high quality family sustaining jobs. So there's really a positive feedback loop there. Now, how to fund Vermont's education system adequately and fairly is a very, very difficult question, a challenging one that's been facing our state for some time. It's one where VBSR has done a host of research on, issuing a 2015 white paper detailing some of our positions as it relates to our financing structure. And in voting on school budgets, voters and officials both will consistently reference the growing burden of property taxes as their primary driver for opposing school budgets. Granted, we had some pretty reasonable votes this past year and had some pretty strong turnout. But again, Vermont's current funding system also pins municipalities and school systems against each other with limited funding pool and a fairly complicated tax scheme. So first and foremost, want to address the crux of this bill, the income versus property-based education taxes. So historically, our over-reliance on property tax means that Vermont's more rural, sparsely populated regions with disproportionately small tax bases couldn't generate the income necessary to provide residents with quality education. And of course, as you all well know, we did a lot of efforts to reduce these disparities. And that ranges anywhere from, creating taxing on non-homestead properties at a uniform rate, tying education to tax, to districts for voted supported spending per pupil, and adjusting education property taxes for homes with up to 2 acres to better reflect household income. So while VBSR recognizes the critical and hard-fought advances that we've made in reducing disparities between Vermont school districts and in keeping our education tax from being overly regressive, property taxes just simply aren't, they're not an adequate method of funding Vermont schools. Property taxes are regressive, and the burden for paying for local schools largely falls on lower to middle class Vermonters. And of course, you'll hear a lot of really common themes as to what Steph has mentioned and others. But ultimately, property taxes just don't reflect a household's ability to pay taxes and afford other critical goods and services. So the most, I'm relying on the Federal Reserve's 2017 assessment that low net worth households typically own homes that exceed 100% of their net worth. And as Steph mentioned, that's largely because they don't have many other assets and they're also mortgaging their homes, so still have to chase down that debt. For middle income families, their home typically rose about 88% of their net worth, and then 25% of the net worth of higher income families. So under current Vermont law, a family making about $125,000 a year would pay roughly 3% of their total household or total income in homestead school taxes. Family making more than $1 million each year pays about 0.5% of their total income taxes, and this largely mirrors national trends. To give a more practical example, and recognizing we now have a lot of cost containment mechanisms and a lot to address disparities, but ultimately, if you took those away, a taxpayer who suddenly found themselves unemployed wouldn't see a change in their property tax bill, even though their ability to pay has greatly diminished. So to draw things back to look at, really at the 10,000 foot level, VBSR developed or held a tax and fiscal policy statement, and that really calls for a tax system that's fair, that's simple, transparent, accountable, sustainable, and also competitive. And we really feel that sort of this overly complex use of an amalgam of property-based and income-based taxes to fund our school system fails to meet these marks. And the changes as proposed in S212, namely to move from a predominantly property-based tax to an income-based tax, would really simplify the education funding system and allow for more participation in school budgeting across the state, again, because of that simplicity. Want to address the non-homestead education property taxes as well. So right now, property taxes contribute to about property taxes contribute about 2/3 of all the revenues to the state's $1.8 billion education fund. And of that, the homestead tax it's about 1/4 of all the revenues, and non-homestead tax, namely those applied to homes, rentals, and commercial properties, they bring in about 40%. So we strongly support retaining that non-homestead tax, especially considering Vermont's abundance of second homeowners in the booming short-term rental market. That being said, cannot stress enough the significance of the tax credit for renters to offset the costs that will continue to be passed down to them by their landlords. We do have some concerns that these expenses, in concert with a new income-based education tax, will create an undue burden for Vermont's renters at a time when rental prices are an all-time high. So, a quick stat there, the Out-of-Reach report from the National Low-Income Housing Coalition reported the average Vermonter needs to earn about $24 an hour to afford a safe, decent place to live in Vermont, but the average renter makes less than $14 per hour. So that marks the 6th largest affordability gap in the nation. So we appreciate some of those cost containment measures for those who have lower AGIs, but really urge this committee to consider both circuit breaker credits and more robust withholding options as well for Vermont taxpayers to ensure that these changes are not overly burdensome on renters. So more of a concern than a hard stop or more on a hard line in that space, but just a flag. And then lastly, on the education fund volatility, I appreciated your comments, Madam Chair, and others. So presently, our property-based education tax funding systems, it's fairly stable and predictable. Our budget informs the property tax rate, required to raise the funds that we need. And the property tax base is a fairly known quantity going into this process. The shift to that income-based model means that there's some volatility passed on to the taxpayer, but to avoid some of the really major shifts in tax rates and to increase predictability, we would encourage you all to consider creating a more robust education stabilization fund and other cost control mechanisms as recommended by the Vermont Tax Commission's most recent report. And that includes the creation of the Education Tax Advisory Committee to support both coordination across the board, also accountability and transparency. So with that, I want to thank you all for the opportunity to offer comments and happy to field questions.
Okay, any questions? I'm not seeing any. So thank you. And if you haven't, can you submit that white paper so we can read it?
Absolutely,
Again?
Madam Chair. I had a hard copy. I had a hard copy only that I had pulled out of our storage unit. So I was looking to either scan it or get a digital one before I got it to you, but I think I found the digital one. So I'll have that to you.
Okay, good. Then we can get it up on our website and folks can read it.
Sounds good.
Okay, then we're going to go to Deb Brighton. So Deb, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Deb Brighton, I'm consultant to the Joint Fiscal Office. And what I wanted to do now was get back to you because when we spoke before, I hadn't been able to actually run the numbers on S212, and I have been able to do that now, although I ran it for FY20. So I'm using actual numbers, but FY20. And so I wanted to give you just some of the results. And but before I start, I wanted to make sure that we are all on the same page, that basically the plan is to replace our current house site education tax and our property tax credit with a tax based on residents' adjusted gross income. And that's the only part that we're changing. Okay, we're not changing the non-residential tax or the other taxes that go into the education fund. And we're also maintaining the yield system, which is what makes us Brigham compliant now. It essentially says that for the same spending per pupil in any district, you would have the same tax rate. It's as if we shared the tax base. Everyone had the same tax base per pupil. We would do the same thing with the AGI. So everyone would still have the same access to the tax base that comes from the combined revenue sources that go into the education fund. And I wonder if I can share my screen.
Yes, I think it would be helpful to.
Okay, I've got some charts for you. They're also on your website.
Okay.
I think.
I think it's easier to look at them straight in front instead of looking up and down usually.
Okay.
I mean,
You can tell me when you see something.
there it is.
Okay, great. So I wanted to start off with the very basics, which is the way we're going to set the rate. And it's the same thing that we do now. Basically, we take the spending per pupil, we divide by a yield, and we come up with a tax rate. And the tax rate would be a % of adjusted gross income. And so it would mean that in any district, it would have access to the same tax base, essentially. It wouldn't depend on the AGI of the residents in their district. It would be statewide. So I just had an example here of District A that spends $15,000 per pupil and District B that spends $17,000 per pupil. In either case, you'd take the spending per pupil, divide by the yield that's set by the state, and you come up with a tax rate. Okay, so the tax rate would be higher in District A than in District B. So we keep the local control. The rates would vary from district to district, but they would vary depending on spending per pupil rather than depending on the AGI of the residents. So this chart is just showing you two things. District A and District B. District A spends less, and so the height of the bar, which is showing you the tax as a % of adjusted gross income by income category. Maybe I'll show you the household income category. So you can see that District A, the bars are consistently lower than the bars in District B because their spending per pupil is lower. And you can also see that in both districts, after you get to an income of $50,000, the height of the bar is the same for all income categories. In other words, no matter what your income category is, you're going to pay that percentage of your income, the same percentage that was set for your whole district.
For the same level of spending, right?
I'm sorry, I missed that question.
For the same, you pay the same percentage for the
Yes.
same level of spending.
That's right. That's
So,
right.
If,
Okay.
Madam Chair, Is it?
Yes,
is
Senator
it-
McDonald, you have a question.
Yeah, is it, what I look at is a complicated bunch of bars and graphs, but have you essentially simply applied the same rules we used to the property tax base now under current law? Have you simply applied them to the new income tax base and then allowed the math to perform the same tasks?
Yes.
So it's just a switch
Essentially,
of tax bases, not a whole new convoluted system that we have to relearn. It is simply a substitution of tax bases for the purpose of comprehending this. Is that a
That-
fair analysis?
that's correct. It's based on
Thank you.
spending per pupil and it's sharing a tax base. It's just stripping off the credits and all the caps and things like that. So it's much simpler.
Thank you. Thank you. Yep.
Okay, so this chart is comparing the same chart that we just looked at with current law. So you've got the income categories across the bottom, and the height of the bar is showing you the tax or the tax bill as a percent of income in each of those income categories. And so, as you would expect, the purple line is straight. And maybe I should point out, actually, the first chart that I showed you was just conceptual. Every chart I'm going to show you after this is based on the actual numbers that we have from FY20. So it's actual people with their mix of house value and income. And the categories at the bottom are household income as we currently know it. And we'd be shifting not from household income, but to AGI. So there is a difference in the way we're measuring income. And they track pretty closely, but there's some definite glitches. But anyway, what you notice here is that the purple line is pretty much straight across, because as we said before, you're paying the same, everyone's paying the same percentage of their income in each district. And when you multiply it or bring it up to the state as a whole, you pretty much get a straight line. But because there is a variation between districts, if you find more high spending districts in one income category than another, you might see a little blip. So, but the height of the red bar is current law. And so you can see that it's higher in certain income categories, but it's definitely not an even percentage of income.
Okay,
Okay.
Deb,
Yes.
I've got a couple questions, I guess. If I am a very wealthy person and I am living in a low spending town, am I going to pay the same percentage of my income as the wealthy person living in the next town that is low spending? Or am
If
I
the-
just paying a statewide flat rate that's equalized?
No, you're paying your town's rate.
Okay,
Okay. So if the town next door, if you were paying $15,000, if your town were spending $15,000 per pupil, and the next town was, you'd be paying the same rate, no matter what town you were in.
okay, but it does fluctuate.
It fluctuates,
Um,
yes.
So all right. I'm trying to figure out why towns with a lot of rich people wouldn't find it easier to spend more. But the one thing that's missing on your chart, I see the percentage of your income, but what's the dollar change there?
Okay.
I mean, to say that's a pretty big, how much more? And again, I'm going to ask you the same thing about the taxing capacity. How did you figure out how much we can tax certain groups before they revolt? And we spent the last Blue Ribbon Tax Commission being very focused on our top marginal rate, because it was the one that showed up in every national study and made us the highest income or second highest income tax in the country. So what's this going to do to that top marginal rate we've been trying to get down?
Okay, I can't answer all of your questions,
Okay.
but I can show you as far as I've gotten in terms of modeling what would happen. Then we have to dig deeper into what this means in the bigger picture. But this is showing you, so the other charts that, had that straight line, that was as a percentage of income. And I think this is getting to Senator Cummings' question about what's the difference in the bill. The chart looks quite different. And this is showing you that the purple lines are showing you that under the resident education tax, the bill would go up because it's a percentage of income. And as the income goes up, 2.5% of the income goes up as well. So the bill goes up. And the red bar is showing you the actual bills. So you can see they're significantly higher at the high end. And this red bar jumping up here is just actual data, the actual people that ended up in that category. It's nothing structural about our current system.
Okay, so right now somebody that's paying looks like $6,000 or $7,000 in, which is pretty low. I'm paying a lot more than that. What town are they getting away with? But they're paying somewhere a little bit, maybe 8, but less than 10,000. They're going to be paying about 25,000 in property tax. So the property tax is going
So
to
in this category,
almost
yeah.
triple.
Yeah,
Well, it wouldn't be in property tax, it'd be in school tax.
It
That's
would be,
correct.
it would be an income tax, whatever.
the education
They're
tax.
going
Yeah.
to be paying 3 times as much next year as this year, right?
Yes.
Or at least more than twice.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. So
And I just asked Deb quickly before you go away
Yeah.
from that chart. I'm intrigued, and this comes back to what I asked Steph earlier. This is a flat tax. So while it has a straight line, I guess you would say, but that's not what we think of as a progressive tax structure, right? And can you just talk quickly about the difference there? For instance, I don't know if you have it yet, but the same structure here with our income tax overlay would be maybe interesting or surprise people.
Yeah, Massachusetts has a flat tax for income. What do they do for school taxes?
Madam Chair, would it be all right if she answered my question first?
Oh, yeah, I didn't know you answered one. I'm sorry.
Well, I really don't know the answer, except that we did talk about on the Tax Structure Commission, we spent a lot of time talking about should this tax be progressive as well, and decided partly for simplicity and partly because of the change to just keep it as a flat percentage of adjusted gross income rather than to make it progressive. And that also helps with volatility issues. So the next step, I think, one of the things that we were frustrated with is the same question that you asked earlier, and that is the tax incidence, compiling everything and trying to figure out by income category with all the different taxes, where are we in terms of the different income categories? And I think that will help us understand whether the system is progressive or not, and also what the capacity is in the different income categories. But at this point, we don't have that collected. So that's sort of our next step. And one of the recommendations that we made about setting up this education finance advisory committee, ongoing committee, is to be able to take a look at this sort of stuff, the combinations and where the school tax fits in, because it's such a huge tax, and keep us up to date on that. I think that as ability to pay changes over time, we want to keep up with it. I think that's sort of what Stephanie was saying. We want to make sure that our tax structure is keeping up with it. Sometimes it wouldn't automatically, but sometimes we need to make other changes too. And we don't catch it because we're not measuring this in any ongoing way. So I can't really answer your question, but I want to.
Thank you, Deb.
Right.
Deb,
So-
you've just totally lost me.
Oh,
What aren't we measuring or can't we measure now?
okay. So what would be nice to answer your questions and to answer Senator Pearson's questions would be to compile the incidents by income category of all our taxes. Okay, and
Okay.
it's not just taxes, it's also our tax structure is taking taxes and it's also giving revenue back.
Right.
So looking at those in steps, where we're taking the taxes from, where it's going back to, and where we end up. But right now, we don't have that. And so it'd be nice to do it once and then to do it periodically so we could see what's changing.
Okay, and you've chosen an outside committee rather than joint fiscal, working with tax and ed to do that?
Well, we definitely wanted an education finance committee so that more people were working on the education finance issues. The Tax Structure Commission didn't say who should do the incidence study. That was sort of a separate recommendation.
Okay, because I think we've got 3 people working on it in joint fiscal right now, working on school taxing. So that may be something we need to work out. Okay,
Okay.
you're on to your next graph.
So that this next chart is just showing a little bit more detail on the people in the lower income ranges where the lines start to diverge. The purple line is the residential education tax that we're proposing. The red line is current law, and the income categories across the bottom. And the line goes up according to what the median tax bill is in each of those income categories. And so you can see at the very low end, the residential tax bill that we're planning to go to would result in a lower bill up to about somewhere around 40 or 50,000 income. Then they're roughly the same. And this going up here, the red line is much higher, over 90,000, because there's that house site cap at 90,000. So we have this suddenly at 90,000, people are paying a higher percentage of their income than at lower incomes or at higher incomes under current law. And then the purple line, the residential education tax, continues pretty much as a straight line, but somewhere around, this was between 200 and 225,000 in FY20, they diverge. And at that point, that's when it starts to get higher. If you go to the residential income tax. So the next chart is just sort of layering on the questions. We get a lot of questions about, are we paying our fair share, or are we just shifting everything to wealthy people? And what are people paying? Who's paying their share? And so this is just showing you the share of total taxpayers we have per income category. So you can see that the bulk, 40% of our taxpayers, and this is just, again, homeowners. Okay, so about 40% of them are in the $50,000 to $100,000 income category. And there are very few up in the higher income categories. And so then if you did the same idea, but instead of looking at the share of households in each category, you're looking at the share of the total taxes that are being raised. The height of the bar is showing you what share of total household education taxes are being raised in each income category. And so the red bar again is current law, the purple bar is going to income. So you see that that same income category that had the most filers is definitely paying a high share, high proportion of the total taxes raised. The other thing to notice is that at the very high end, the residential, the income version that we're going to, the residential tax would be a lot higher than current law.
Deb, not to put too fine a point on it, but this is what we're looking at here proves the slogan, I guess, that this is a strategy to offer middle class tax relief. Right? I mean, this is the people between 50 and 150 are seeing a significant. I just want to make sure that's what I'm looking at, but it's they're seeing the benefit in that sense, and the people at the very high end are furnishing that benefit.
Yes. Yeah. So the next chart sort of compares the two, those overlays the two charts. So you see that, I think, and that the gray bars are showing you where the people are, the share of households, and then the lines are showing you the percent of education tax that each group would pay. Okay, so the red line is under current law, and then the blue line is under the income. And so what happens is you get a drop in the percentage in this category, the 5,200 income category, you see a drop. And then you definitely see an increase over here where you have less than 1% of the filers are in this category, and they pay 8.6% of the education taxes under the residential education rate. That's the biggest difference. Okay. And this is another way, though, to look at the shares. And so this is showing you the shares of taxes raised, again, but by the share of adjusted gross income.
Compared by income.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the gray bar is showing you how much of the state's total household adjusted gross income is in each income category. And you see again that a high amount of it, because there are a whole lot of filers, not because they have high AGI necessarily, but a whole lot of it is in the 50 to 100 thousand income category. And then you also see there's a big jump up here in the category of over $1 million. And you can also see that the purple line, which is the share that would be raised by the resident education tax, tracks this perfectly, because that's what we're doing.
Because it reflects your ability to pay.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Huh.
Okay. That is the purpose. And, you know, this next one shows basically the same chart, but it also shows you where we are, the red line being current law. So you can see the same differences that you saw before. It doesn't track where the AGI is as well as the way we would be going to. So it's not a huge change that we're making, but you can see where the differences are. Okay. There is a table there that I don't want to go through, but it shows you where, in which income categories, how many people would see an increase and how many people would see a decrease in their tax bill. And I've decided after dealing with this so many times that we look at that and we focus way too much on the change from where we are now, and instead of focusing on where we're trying to get to and whether it's fair. So you're welcome to look at it. You've got it up on the website, but in the interest of time, I wanted to spend a little bit more time on where we're trying to get to. And so this last chart is just showing you a town, and this is a real town. And There are people in higher income categories, but I'm not allowed to show data for small numbers of people for confidentiality purposes. And the reason I'm showing you this is because the change, some people ask where the big change is going to be, what towns are going to be winners and what towns are going to be losers. And essentially, it's not a town by town change. It's not a district by district change. As Senator McDonald said, we're doing the same thing as we did before. We're setting our rate exactly the same way. So a high spending district will still be a high spending district. And a low spending district will still be a low spending district. And so that won't change. But what does change is within a district, the bills will depend on people's, the relationship, well, it'll be based now on their adjusted gross income. And so it will change based on the relationship between their income and their house value. Okay, because that's what they were paying on before. They were paying on some combination of income and house value. And so in this town, which is Middlebury, you can see that where the purple bar is lower, that's the income category where the bill would drop slightly. And where the purple bar is higher, it's in that income category where the bill would go up. Okay, so it's not going to change things in terms of what's a high tax district and what's a low tax district. We're still basing that the same way. It's just shifting it around.
Mayor, may I ask you a question?
Senator Brock, head on mute.
I can see, excuse me, that in this particular case, if you move over to the right side of the chart, there's some people who it looks like would effectively have their taxes doubled during the course of the year. Others, the change is much more modest, but it's much more obvious at the large end. In terms of tax reductions, though, it is less significant, again, until you get to the very high end. The question that I've got is, as you look at the very, very, very wealthy people in Vermont who probably aren't on your chart, the person who hits 20 million or 30 million a year, huge amounts of income, their taxes would go up exponentially. And is there any thought as to whether or not that might have an out-migration impact on those higher end taxpayers? Each one of whom who leaves would have a disproportionate impact on the rest of the system.
Right. It's a kind of question that I really can't answer. And, I think that it's one of the things that we've thought about is just trying to figure out what the combined tax burden is on different incomes, particularly on high incomes now, how that compares with other states. But in terms of at what point it's too much or whatever, I don't exactly know how to get at. But it's definitely the next step to look at.
$30 million a year, and you took a 2.5%, you've got what, $750,000 in taxes. Whereas if they had a very expensive home under the system we have right now, they may pay $20,000, $30,000 at the most.
Yeah.
That's a big, and are there any studies as to what motivates out migration among the wealthy?
It's a good question. I can't answer it. I'm going to try to dive into it.
Okay, thank you.
If I could just sort of finish up on the things that you don't really see in this chart about where we're going is that what this also does is it makes it very simple and very direct, so that when people go to school meeting to vote in the budget, they would know. They're in the process of preparing their income tax. They know what their income was for, say, 2021. They would therefore know what like a 2.5% rate, if that's what they're voting in, would do to them. There would be no pay one tax first and get a credit in the next year. So it would be pretty clear and pretty direct. I think also we would start thinking of this tax as what you should pay. And right now, what we're doing with this combination of property tax and education tax is we're sort of looking at property tax is the right thing, and this education credit is like a subsidy. And so it's shifting our thinking, I think, to saying we want to make sure that our tax is fair, and this is what our tax is, not what the subsidy is. And I think basically it's an attempt to move to the ability to pay.
Okay. Deb, couple questions. I lost my train of thought on one of them, but we've always tried to limit major impacts on your tax bill. We do most things in 3 to 5 year. I think we're looking at waiting in 5-year increments. To go from 30,000 to 750 is more than a 3% jump. Have we thought about how we're going to phase this in?
No, haven't gotten to that yet.
Okay. And we haven't done the research on the total tax burden, right? When we look at different categories. All right.
Right.
And those are things we probably should know.
Definitely.
How does Massachusetts, that has a flat tax on income, how does it fund its schools? Do you know?
I don't know.
All
I'll
right.
check.
Senator Pearson?
Thanks. Deb, I think it's just worth saying, I know the answer, but what we're talking about eliminates homeowners' property tax for school tax, right? I mean, we've been talking about what it means to income taxpayers, but what it means to homeowners is they no longer get a property tax bill that has their eyes popping. Other than municipalities, as we heard, may react to that, having had many years of sort of stagnant income. I think it was you said that people would be able to, maybe it was Stephanie, that people would be able to pay this over time. And there are some towns where your property tax bill is due once a year. Most towns, I think, are 4 times a year. Can you just talk about mechanically, have we envisioned this as part of the withholding? And is that complicated because the business has to figure out where you live, or would there be a placeholder withholding and then it would get trued up? Can you just talk about some of those mechanics, please?
Well, right now, the way the bill is written, it's assumed that it would be withholding if that's what you have, or estimated payments if that's what you do. But other people have said it may be better to just have, to keep it separate from the personal income tax, and to have 4 installments or 5 installments, closer to what some towns have done for property taxes. And part of the reason for that is, as you said, we're shifting, we're talking about this as a tax based on income, but we're totally replacing your property tax paid on your homestead. And so in a sense, we don't want it to get confused with the income tax. We have a personal income tax, and we're calling this the residential education tax. And so maybe it should be kept separate, also in terms of the withholding or the estimated payments. But the idea is just basically to not have that one lump sum payment.
Okay.
And what does it do? There's a plenty of people that fill out their taxes and get a refund because maybe the earned income tax credit or other things. How does this fit on top of that and some of those existing structures in our income tax?
Yeah, it could be similar. I mean, basically, if you pay in, particularly if you, the way it's written now is that there would be withholding, and it would just, you'd have like 3 choices of percentages, and there wouldn't be any penalty if you chose the wrong one, but you'd reconcile at the end. So you might get a credit if you chose a high withholding amount. So
But
it could be done that way.
I guess what I mean is it's ironic, but there are tens of thousands of Vermonters who are quite eager to fill out their taxes every year because they get a refund because of our refundable tax credits. I want to make sure that I'm right. I don't believe this, there's no getting refunded out of this one. Like this is a hard obligation that the earned income tax credit might work against, but there's no, right. In other words, somebody that today gets a refund in effect, or it would seem like their tax bill is 0 in April. There's no way they still get 0. They're gonna have to pay this, what did you call it? Under this scheme, they're
Right.
gonna have a bill, right?
Right. So that's a good point. It would be independent of, it's not going to lower your earned income tax credit. It's not going to change any of that. You have to pay this bill.
Okay, and then the other question I have, because it's another complexity that we have, is, and I might, when I first started talking about this, I stood with Bud Otterman and Joy Donovan, and which dates me because Bud Otterman's been in the ground for a while. May he rest in peace. And he was a principled, bullish conservative. I liked working with him, but he was from Topsham, I think, and he liked this because it had a real impact on rural communities, and that had to do something I'm not sure I could explain with the home site and 2-acre kind of division. Is that, can you, am I right to still be grounded in there? And I guess really the question is, what does this do for rural communities where, you have a lot of acres in your home, on your lot? And I think we treat different parts of that acres, and maybe it's only for folks in current use, but can you walk me through that? Because there are implications for rural communities that we should understand.
Yeah, I would say rural communities, if you have 10 acres or something, it's not as helpful because this only affects your house in 2 acres. Okay. And the current use program won't pick up that until you have 25 more acres. So you have to have a house in 27 acres before you can get into current use. So we've got that odd bubble in there where so if you had a house and 17 acres, the house in 2 acres, you'd switch and pay on income. But the 15 acres would be subject to the tax, the non-homestead tax. Okay, that's all there would be. There wouldn't be a homestead property rate the way we have it now. So it would be as if it were non-homestead. But it is true that the listers are directed now to value the 2 acres around your house as sort of a separate house and 2 acre lot. So the 15 extra acres would be low value. That hasn't always been true.
And so am I hearing you say that wouldn't be, there's not a big difference to what it means if depending on the size of your lot, or if you live in a town or a city, you're just getting this applied to your income.
Yeah, I mean, the difference is if you have those extra acres and you're not in current use, you would have to pay the non-homestead tax on that. If you were in town and you only had a house and 2 acres, you wouldn't have that extra acreage to pay anything on.
Okay, so a rural person of low income would pay on their income for the first 2 acres. But if they owned 20 acres, they were going to pay the non-residential property tax, local property tax on that additional 20 acres. So that would be
Virtually the same as it is today.
That's correct.
except that I think it's guaranteed that the local resident property tax will go up, because I don't know a community that, if they could get any tax flexibility, doesn't have really good things they could use it on. So Deb, we're getting our next group in, but I remembered what I wanted to ask, if when you figured the overall tax kind of burden on different groups, part of the Trump tax credits was, and I think we're trying to find a way around it, but 2 people, a couple household that works for salaries, and you get 2 advanced practice nurses, a doctor and an advanced practice nurse, and they own a nice house, they can't deduct those credits from their federal tax anymore. So if we are in fact raising your tax bill $750,000 for one person, that's also $750,000 that can't be deducted from your federal taxes. So it is something of it's a double hit there. And we, just when we're figuring that, figure out that impact.
That's a good point.
Senator Pearson, one last one, because I've got my
Thank you.
next.
Yeah, I know we've only got 1 minute. Deb, could you just tell us what pieces do we still need to work out here if we want to advance this? Because I know we're late, but I'd love to give it a shot.
In the bill, you mean?
Yeah, to really enact this, and we need something around a phase-in period. I believe we need to figure out some of the mechanics for renters. So I'm looking for, and you can answer me offline if you want.
Okay.
But, that is important if we're going to have a prayer here.
All right. I'll give
I
you a
need
list
to
offline.
have a lot more information on the total tax burden.
Madam Chair, I've been asking to work on this since early January.
Yes, and we've been waiting on it since early January, and I have been asking for it. Senator Bray.
Well, I know we're short on time and we're moving on, but I just wanted to speak up in support of it, because I think there's a lot of merit, and it seems like at heart it tries to come back at a definition of fairness that I think many people share. So I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So committee, we are going on to our next bill, which is S-227. It's an act relating to income tax exemption for federal civil service retirement system income. And we have with us today Fred Dunn and Mary Nadeau. And I think Fred on the agenda first, but if you have a different presentation, that's You're welcome to switch places or tag team or whatever you'd like. Just introduce yourself and who you represent for the record.
Is Fred on? I don't see him on my screen.
Yes, he's sitting, he is on, I see him. I don't know what your screen is doing.
Okay.
It's a lovely sailboat and a sunset in the background.
I will
Sunrise.
start by introducing myself. My name is Mary Nadeau, and I live in Hartford Village, and I'm the president of NARF, which is the National Active Retired and Federal Employees Association. Fred is our treasurer, and he's going to take the lead in this discussion today.
Okay, so Fred, the floor looks like it's yours.
Thank you, Chair Ann Cummings. Good afternoon, everyone. Vice Chair Mark McDonald is here today, and other members of the Senate Committee for Finance. NARF is the National Active and Retired Federal Employees Association. I am a Army veteran, and I proudly served 9 years as a member of the Board of Trustees at the Vermont Veterans Home. Mary and I sincerely appreciate your invitation to join your committee for a few minutes to discuss S227, an act relating to the income tax exemption for federal civil service retirement system income. The CSRS began on August 1st of 1920, 15 years before President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act. Both retirement systems have successfully kept millions of senior citizens safe and comfortable at the end of their working years. As you know, Vermont has kindly and wisely exempted Social Security income from the state income tax for lower income retirees. S227 aims to correct the exclusion of a small minority of Vermont retirees whose pensions are under the CSRS. Employees of the federal government and the Postal Service paid 7% of their post-tax gross income to the CSRS in lieu of paying money into the Social Security system. 35 years ago, this retirement system, CSRS, was converted into a new Federal Employees Retirement System, or FERS. FERS included participation in the Social Security system. Any federal or postal employee hired since January 1st, 1987 is enrolled in FERS. What this means for Vermont is that there are now about 2,429 CSRS retirees in the state. The number will steadily decline until it reaches zero. There still could be a small number of CSRS employees working in the federal government and the Postal Service. They would have at least 35 years of service now. But as they retire, the few that are left, their entry into the retired ranks would certainly be offset by the older retirees and survivors who pass away. There are two federal acts that restrict Social Security benefits for CSRS retirees. One is the Windfall Elimination provision. It reduces Social Security pensions for CSRS retirees who may have had an additional career in which they paid into the Social Security system. The other act is the government pension offset. The GPO usually eliminates a Social Security survivor benefit for a CSRS retiree if their spouse dies. I recently experienced that myself. My wife died 5 months ago, and I do not get a survivor benefit because of that. But my point is that it is possible for some CSRS retirees in Vermont to have a Social Security benefit depending on their work history. The latest national figures we have for CSRS retirees and survivors is as follows. Retirees, the average nationally is $4,163 a month, or $3,631 as a median. Survivors are much less, $1,805 for a monthly average and $15.93 for a median. It's obvious that many CSRS retirees will have an income that exceeds the exemption limits of S227. Here in Vermont, we do the right thing. It's our culture. I ask you to kindly help this diminishing group of Vermont retirees who've honorably served America in their federal and postal careers. Thank you for your time and your service to Vermont. And I'll gladly any questions you may have, Senators.
Okay, we already exempt Social Security benefits up certain amount up to a certain total income level. So ability to pay. Are you saying that because people that started employment before 87 haven't paid any Social Security, or would you, if you have paid Social Security, aren't you already covered under that exemption?
Fred, did you-
Well, anyone that was hired in the federal or federal government or postal service before 1987, they were not paying any money into the Social Security system as employees of the federal government or the postal service.
Right.
So like in my case, I worked 8 years under the Social Security system, which isn't enough for even a minimum anyway, but my only retirement would be the civil service retirement system. Absolutely no Social Security. And many, if not most, civil service retirement retirees do not get Social Security.
Well, at
But if you
this
have
point,
you could have a mixed career.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how we can make things equitable with people that their entire government retirement pension, which for most people that don't work for a business in Vermont that has a pension system, how we can make things equitable. So postal people, federal people that started after 87, they're just getting a federal pension plus Social Security. Our joint fiscal the other day said that to exempt all of your pension would be very expensive because your pension was set up to equal a standard pension plus Social Security. And that was our joint
Could
fiscal.
I jump in here? There are two parallel systems, okay? Anyone hired after 87 is in FERS, okay? The Federal Employees Retirement System.
Right.
They are covered, they are under Social Security. That's a component of their retirement. Those of us who were hired under the Civil Service Retirement System, I started my government career in 1974. We're not allowed to participate in the Social Security system. Now, I want to say up front, we're not saying that everybody who is a retired Civil Service Retirement System annuitant would be covered under S227. It would be only those for whom their total annual income is $45,000 or less, or married couples whose total income is $55,000 or less. Okay, so like Fred and I, this wouldn't apply to us at all. We both have incomes that comfortably exceed those limitations. We are talking about the small number of people who would be primary, and there's no way we can come up with an accurate figure as to how many of the 2,429 CSRS annuitants have incomes below those ceilings, the $55,000 for married couples and the $45,000 for individuals. We don't have access to those figures.
Okay.
But due to the fact that government jobs generally paid very well, the majority of us have incomes that would exceed that $45,000 limit. There's no way of predicting, even if there are 100 retired civil service retirement employees, annuitants in Vermont, they should be given the same tax benefit as people on Social Security under
Yes,
those.
which is,
This is what we're asking for.
higher than the numbers you're using. And we've got a proposal to raise them higher. Okay, Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to clarify, I'm looking at the bill at the moment. Thank you, Mr. Dunn and Ms. Nadeau, for your testimony. It looks like what you're asking for, just to be clear, is for those people who do not get Social Security benefits because of the nature of their positions with the federal government before 1987. They just paid into the civil service retirement system. You're asking for the same tax exemption for the same income levels. So you just said 45 and 55. It actually goes up a little higher than that. I think it goes up to 70,000 for
married couples.
Yeah, so there are a couple levels, but regardless, what you're asking for is exactly the same as what people who get Social Security get, not anything more than that, because these people, your former colleagues, potentially didn't pay into Social Security.
Exactly.
Okay.
We're just asking for equality. The only difference really between people on Social Security that are under those income benchmarks and civil service is that the civil service retirement annuitants were not allowed to participate in Social Security, and they chose government service as their careers.
Right.
And as you probably all know, there was one other group that did not participate in Social Security, and that would be the railroad retirees, but they automatically are exempted from paying the Vermont income tax due to federal law. Okay.
Right.
So it's just a small group. We're not asking, this would not cost the state a bundle of money, because the majority of us have comfortable annuities, but there were just that small group, many of whom are elderly women who worked part-time for the Postal Service as part-time flexible clerks in these small communities, or were postmasters in tiny offices, third and fourth class offices. They never made very much money to begin with. The annuity is based on a formula that includes the number of years of employment and the high 3 years of salary. So they didn't, especially these part-time flexible clerks. In many cases, this was the only employment that was available in their little communities. So all we're asking for is for low-income CSRS annuitants to be treated with equality. So yes, Senator Hardy, you understand the situation perfectly.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. I just want one more clarifying question is, I think I hear you saying that you're not sure exactly how many of these people may or may not exist.
There's no way. We don't have, the Office of Personnel Management is not going to tell us what people's annuities are.
So we don't have a fiscal note on it. That's the question.
No, we don't know. But I think we can speak with considerable accuracy, especially because CSRS employees after they reached the age 55, if they had 30 years of service, many of them went on to lucrative careers in the private sector. So their incomes would be way over the 45,000, so we just can't predict, but we have every reason to believe that it would be a very small number of people compared to the, 40,000 under Social Security who qualify for this exemption.
Okay, we will have to check because our joint fiscal office said this would be much more expensive. So I will, we'll ask him to re-walk us through that now.
Okay.
Senator Pearson.
Yeah, Madam Chair, and for the witnesses, I recall JFO saying it would be more expensive and then describing the benefit as assuming sort of the role of Social Security and a pension. And so the benefit being more valuable. But I think that's right in my memory, but
Yeah,
I
that's what
would
he said.
guess we could craft this. I hope we can craft this in a way that's fair and sort of is designed to match the impact that is felt by Social Security recipients and can somehow calculate out the piece of the retirement benefit that would be more akin to a pension. I mean, fairness, not more, not less, but equity in that way. But I think, I guess my point is, I believe that was the factor that had JFO telling us it could be more expensive.
Okay, yeah. So we'll get back and calculate that because we've got several sets of pensions and they all will take some revenue out of the stream. So I think that it's the total package that we're also.
Well, I would just like you to zero in on the fact that S-227 applies only
Yes,
to people that are not eligible for Social Security
yes.
because they were government employees. And also, I mean, I don't know how to say this delicately, but when this issue came up before, unfortunately, the Joint Fiscal Office gave some statistics that were absolutely inaccurate. And we need to have an opportunity to weigh in on this.
Okay, well,
We're talking here about a small number of people who don't have any income except a civil service retirement system. This has nothing to do with Social Security. This has
right.
nothing to do
No,
with
we understand that. But our Joint Fiscal Office is not known for being inaccurate.
Well,
I think they may well have access to numbers that those of us in the real world don't. So we will double check their figures. I think personally, I would like to treat everybody equitably, and I would like to be able to treat retirees from the civil service the same way we treat people that are under the Social Security system. It was all set up to do the same thing, which is to allow people some fiscal security in their old age. So we will work on finding a way to do that. Okay. Mr. Dunn, yes.
Yeah, Chair, Cummings, I just want to point out, I was looking at the Joint Fiscal Office report from last year. And the reason that Social Security recipients seem to be getting much less of a break is because previous to the law that exempted their income here in Vermont, they were exempt at the federal level, and that impacted their state taxes. They had exemptions
came off the
incomes up to
AGI,
34,000,
right.
50% exempt. Yeah. So
Yes,
I mean,
you don't
it
get the
creates the
federal
appearance
exemption.
that
Right.
No. So they were already getting a state tax exemption because of the
Right.
federal exemption. That's
Because
my
we are
belief,
piggybacked.
reading this report. Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. I think we're going to move on to our next pension. Am I right? Does anybody else have any questions on the civil service? Because we're going to go on to military pensions.
Whose schooner is that?
Oh, that's down in Key West, right off of Mallory Square a few years ago.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
You're welcome.
we're gonna go on, and this is no, this is S53. I'm getting ahead of myself. This is, yeah, we're back to S53, sections 14 and 15, which is the military retirement exemption. And we have Chris Kerrigan from the Vermont Chamber here. So Mr. Kerrigan, just introduce yourself for the record, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair Cummings. Chair Cummings and honorable committee members, my name is Chris Kerrigan, and I serve as Vice President of Business Development with the statewide Vermont Chamber of Commerce. In my role, I manage our manufacturing division, the Vermont Chamber's Aerospace and Aviation Association, the annual Manufacturing Supply Chain Summit, the Vermont Quebec Aerospace and Defense Trade Corridor, and partner very closely with the Vermont Air National Guard and the Vermont Army National Guard, particularly on our Find Your Future Workforce initiative, which matches students and Guard members with employers for jobs and internships. I also serve on the Governor's Aviation Council. The statewide Vermont Chamber of Commerce represents 1,200 members, the vast majority being small businesses from all industries and sectors of Vermont's business and manufacturing community. The Vermont Chamber of Commerce strongly supports the removal of the state taxation on military retirement pay and survivors' benefits for military retirees. Military retirees often serve for at least 20 years and retire from military service between the ages of 38 and 42. With a full second civilian career ahead of them, they are public service oriented. They have a high degree of training and possess transferable professional skills to fill essential skilled jobs and continue contributing to the workforce, especially in impacted industries such as manufacturing, and until they reach traditional retirement age. To illustrate, those who enlisted in the wake of September 11th, for example, are now set to retire, but they have more than 20 years of workforce participation ahead of them. In the meantime, paradigm shifts brought about by the pandemic have impacted global supply chains, and importantly, the labor market by presenting employers with yet another challenge. Vermont employers face not only a shrinking aging demographic in Vermont and declining school enrollments, but they also face severe workforce labor shortages, accentuated and exacerbated by the Great Reshuffle, the Great Resignation, and the Great Retirement. The Vermont Futures Project identified that Vermont needed 10,000 workers in the labor force before the pandemic. That number has certainly increased as we now have 23,000 job openings, as highlighted by Vermont Governor Phil Scott in his annual budget address. Adding to the challenge, Vermont is currently only one of 3 states that fully tax military retirement pay, and in doing so, discourage military retirees and the next future generation of active duty military set to retire from moving to Vermont upon conclusion of their service. It also incentivizes military retirees and active duty military approaching retirement to leave Vermont for states that don't tax military pensions. According to the Vermont Legislative Joint Fiscal Office, and over the past 15 years, on average, only 36 new retirees were added annually to Vermont's list of retirees. This number could and should be much higher to help address Vermont's severe workforce labor shortage. As we work to recruit more people to the state of Vermont and make Vermont attractive to all new residents, we also need to do so in a way that welcomes all people. 43% of the US military is Black and Indigenous people of color, BIPOC. Fewer than 6% of Vermonters are people of color. The Vermont Chamber of Commerce believes incentivizing military retirees to either stay or move to Vermont would increase the diversity of our population and communities, while also strengthening our workforce and helping to address and mitigate Vermont's severe workforce labor shortage. In closing, the Vermont Chamber supports fully exempting military pensions and survivor benefits for military retirees for workforce recruitment, workforce retention, workforce diversity, military service recognition, and to make Vermont more attractive and competitive with other states. As mentioned, Vermont is facing a workforce labor shortage crisis, and it is a crisis. And the proposed $3.1 million tax expenditure in the governor's budget for a full exemption is a small, affordable, timely, and much needed investment in building our future workforce for statewide economic growth and to help Vermont and Vermont businesses recover from the pandemic. I thank you for your time and consideration and happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay. Chris, their military are not the only pensions for people that retire early. How would the chamber feel about exempting the pensions for police officers who generally retire after 20 years and have been putting their lives on the line? I think firefighters also frequently retire early because of the physical nature. How do I say to a group, one group is more worthy than another to have their pension not taxed, no matter what their income is?
I would say that, at this time, we're very much focused on this population, especially given the second career opportunity for those military retirees that are retiring between 38 and 42 and that have the second career ahead of them. And it's important for the workforce recruitment and retention.
Okay. Committee, any questions? All right. We're going to have okay, Senator Hardy.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Kerrigan. I'm curious, not everybody who serves in the military gets a military pension. It's just a certain segment of military retirees. Is that correct? Can you explain that?
Correct. So you have to serve at least 20 years in order to get the pension.
And do you have to have a certain rank or a certain position in the military to get the pension?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. And how is the pension amount determined? Is it based on how much they earned, or do you know how the pension amount is determined?
I do not.
Senator Brock.
We'll have some people. We'll have some people next week. I think we'll have some real expertise in that.
We'll have scheduled several people who are military retirees who can address that and similar questions. The normal factor is its rank and length of service that determines the pension amount.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'll look forward to getting more information about how it's determined.
And I would just add to that, we think it's important to include the survivors' benefits because the military spouses are valuable to the workforce as well. And in fact, over 30% of military spouses who are employed work in licensed or certified fields such as teaching and nursing. And these two fields, of course, were significantly impacted by the COVID pandemic and should be a focus when attracting and recruiting individuals to the state to help address our workforce labor shortage.
And do you have data that shows that this actually helps to recruit or not recruit people to the state?
Senator Brock is shaking his head. We have a whole hour set up next week that we're going to go into this.
Okay.
So this was just our first walkthrough. Survivors benefits, and I don't know, Mr. Kerrigan, if you know it or not, but if we sent somebody with 18 years of service to Iraq and they were killed, so they weren't in long enough to get a pension, is there a survivor's benefit for the family?
I do not know that.
You don't know that. Okay, that would be a question to find out. All right, Senator McDonald.
What's the chamber's position on people that were drafted into the military and fought in combat who then left the military?
Didn't serve 20 years.
When their draft time expired.
So I don't understand your question. Are you asking me if they should deserve the pension or?
No, we heard a lot of talk about how this is a thank you for people that served their country in the military. I was asking for veterans two of whom are on this committee, who were drafted or went into the military and did their 2 or 3 years of service in combat zones, and then are living amongst the population. What's the Chamber's attitude towards that group?
Well, we honor their service.
Thank you very much. We were talking, this is the Finance Committee.
Okay, I think that's.
Thank you, Madam
got
Chair.
Your answer. Okay. All right. They don't have a pension to forgive.
But we have a rest area named in our honor.
You do. You do. That is very honorable. Hey, at least it's got an inside now and it's not all porta potties. All right, we're going to go on. And we're only a minute behind schedule. This is the management of perpetual care funds and cemetery associations. And Tucker is here with us. And Tucker, hopefully, can you share the new draft of this bill? We've been waiting for input from the treasurer's office. And just walk us through.
Yes, let me try just one moment to share this with you.
Things have been awfully slow lately.
I would agree. And just to let the committee know, I'm going to work from draft 1.1 because that's what I'm able to bring up from the committee page. And I'll highlight an error, a technical error in the draft that's corrected in draft 1.2 that Faith has updated the page, but it's just not loading for me because things are a little slow.
Because. All right.
Because. So the amendment that you have in front of you is going to take H367 as it came over from the House, and it's going to add one new section that contains the treasurer's proposals for updating the list of investments that are available to town cemeteries and cemetery associations under the scheme of H367. So to start, section 1, these are the treasurer's proposals, and this would update 18 VSA section 5384. And again, these are the enumerated list of investment opportunities for the managers of town cemeteries and moving forward cemetery associations. In general, what the treasurer is proposing is first to condense some of the subdivisions so that it's easier to read and things are grouped in a logical way. And second, to eliminate some of the outdated investment types here. So the first proposal is to list that certificates of deposit, evidences of deposit at Vermont national or federal chartered banks, and savings and loan associations that are guaranteed or insured by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation or its successor. These are all existing opportunities in the statute. The update here is really to clean up some of the language, condense down the types of chartered banks that are available for these sorts of investments, and finally to correct the reference from the Federal Savings and Loan Insurance Corporation to the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation.
Okay, and Tucker, there was an email came in late yesterday about limiting it to federal chartered. Did we get that resolved?
Was that the communication from DFR?
Yeah.
Yes, I'll touch upon that in a moment because that has
Okay.
more to do with something that's absent from the bill.
Okay.
So the next proposal is to allow investment in obligations of the United States agencies and instrumentalities which have a liquid market with readily determinable market value. This is a cleanup of some of the bond and US issued bond language that existed in the section. The treasurer is instead attaching this to obligations of the US and then having a standard attached to that, those that have a liquid market with readily determinable market value. Similarly, the next item, investment grade obligations of state or local governments, instrumentalities, and public authorities. This cleans up some of those references around municipal bonds and debts or anticipation of taxes. Those are the cleanup proposals. What isn't here, because it wasn't being amended, is the next section of this statute, which permits town cemeteries to hire an investment manager according to the Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act. And the communication that came from DFR actually had to do with the difference between this bill and S-253 as it was proposed. S-253 would have limited the types of investment managers that a town cemetery or cemetery association could have hired, but this is more open. So DFR was pointing to this as this bill gives those associations the opportunity to hire a manager who's registered with the state, but S-253 would have been more limited.
Okay.
Section 2 contains the proposal as it came over from the House. Again, this permits cemetery associations to invest in the same list of investments as town cemeteries, the expanded list that we just went through, and to allow them to delegate the management and investment of those funds to a manager under UPMIFA. And here's the error. There are 2 section 2s in the amendment, but if the page has refreshed, I fixed that so that there is a section 3 for the effective date.
That is a major problem. Okay. So that starts July. All right. So basically, is this written as a strike all?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So we have a bill, but what we're doing is we're taking their H bill they sent us. We're adding the recommendations for investment managers of DFR and the treasurer's office, and we're going to send it back, right?
That is correct.
Yeah, and we're still sitting on an S bill. Okay. Senator Hardy.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just want to clarify, Tucker, the question that came from DFR, which I didn't see. So are they okay with the way this is handled in this draft?
Yes, I reached out to the person who emailed me and asked if they were okay with H357, 367, and they said yes, that's what they prefer as opposed to the S bill. So this.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, great, thank you.
I think this makes everybody happy. I hope it makes the cemetery associations happy, but the government's happy. Any questions for Tucker? Are we ready to make a motion? We can sit here all afternoon, Senator Hardy.
I will make a motion to approve draft, I think it would be 1.2, Tucker, is that right? Because you have to fix the 2s of H367.
Okay.
I'd have made the motion, Madam Chair, but it's a cemetery bill.
But you have enough to do to write down the vote, Senator.
We leave it.
Okay.
We leave the younger people to make that one.
Senator Hardy has moved that we approve H367 draft 1.2 with that renumbering of the second section 2 to 3. Is there any further discussion? Got 5. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? I am seeing that as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
02.
02. Okay, who would like to report this one?
Oh, thank you, Senator Brock. That's terrific.
It's beyond my capability. I'm stuck on military.
Come on, guys.
I'll be glad to do it for you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Senator Pearson will be the
Maybe
reporter, and Tucker, will you send the clean copy up to the Senate office?
Madam Chair, Senator
Yes.
Sorokin is back, and since the people bringing this are in Charlotte, I wonder if we would.
Yes,
be able to
Senator
include his vote.
Sorokin, would you like to vote on this? You voted yes.
Yes.
So it is now 601. Senator Sorokin, would you like to report this?
Sure.
Senator Pearson, you want to give it up?
Do you know what you're agreeing
Somebody
to?
else volunteer?
I don't. Senator Sorokin's got a lot going on.
Okay, Senator Pearson, Tucker, will you send the clean copy up? Senator Pearson, you just need to contact, Senator Bray has come back. Senator Bray, do you want to vote on these? You're muted, Senator.
I ended up having my thing just disappear.
Okay, you're here. We just voted on the association cemetery bill where we added the language on investments and investment counselors brought to us by the treasurer. Would you like to vote on that?
I would, Madam Chair.
What is your vote?
My vote is yes.
Okay, so good thing we didn't rush that upstairs. So we're now at 7-0-0.
Wonder if Senator Bray would like to report the bill.
No, it's not in his district. That's also been bounced around. Okay, so Tucker, if you just send a clean copy as soon as you get one up to the Senate office. Senator Pearson, you might want to email Bloomer now. Last time I had a Friday afternoon bill, everything was shut down. But I think that
I'll go
was
up there,
more
Madam
the
Chair.
tech guy
tell
had
him it's-
shut down the computers early. So you might just let him
I'll
know
be
it's coming.
glad to send it to him. And Tucker, I'll copy you so that we're
Yeah.
all official. Thank
We
you.
can just let Tucker know that, or John know Tucker is sending up the clean copy. Okay. That gets us on to S-247. This is the prohibiting discrimination based on genetic information. Committee, I have not had a chance by the time I got, and I had sent out to you a whole markup, I think from Jill, that I think the basic issue here is the way this is written. The Senate Health and Welfare last year added the ability for family history that's in your medical record to be used in underwriting for life insurance. That didn't get extended to long-term care or disability insurance. And then, so that's one issue to deal with. The other is if genetic information is in your medical record but has not manifested itself, that is not allowed. Do we want to keep that? And the third one was, pulling a blank. Medical records. Somebody help me out. There was a third issue we needed to deal with. Setting a cap. It's been suggested if, because of the way underwriting is set up, that it wouldn't take too many people to take out probably only one in Vermont to take out a $50 million insurance policy, because they knew something the insurance company didn't when they were underwriting, to raise the rates for the next group of folks buying insurance. So do we want to say something like for policies over $1 million, a company may require further testing, or those I think are the three issues. Did someone else, did anybody got another one? No. Okay.
Well, one thing I did notice is over the last 24 hours, my inbox has been overloaded by identically worded, word for word, um, requests that we not pass this bill. And it's, French company, you know, has to get people through one of these services, and whether or not, to what extent these comments are genuine based on knowledge, but I just thought it unusual.
I haven't gotten to mine since mid-morning. Mine were all from optometrists and ophthalmologists.
Yeah, those
And
two.
people that want us to let the auditor into the ACO. So maybe I have another whole set of emails to look forward to. Senator Bray, thoughts?
Well, maybe because of the identical nature of the emails, I found like 35 of them in my spam folder last evening. So you may be getting
I
them,
haven't checked my
and
spam
your
folder.
software may be trying to, you know, route them someplace
You
for
must be better than mine because I get an awful lot of identical emails.
Yeah.
Can I ask, I apologize, I need to step out of the meeting for a couple minutes
Yeah.
intentionally this time. And, but I don't know if you're trying to vote this bill today.
I'm trying to just find, no, I'm not going to vote it. It's controversial enough. We'll put it on for next week. I'm just trying to figure out what we need to do. And Damien is here. Maybe we'll see if Damien can kind of step us through this and figure out if we're ready to have something drafted to vote on.
Okay. So as I walk out the door, before I would just say I'm supportive of the bill because of the technology's ability to help patients take timely action in a way that would help them respond to diseases yet undetected, you know, and I'd hate to have that ever work against a patient. So I'll see you momentarily.
Oh, okay, because that doesn't, I think we all want to support genetic testing.
Right.
It's been alleged that a large number of people won't get the genetic testing because they're afraid they'll be denied life insurance, which I suppose depends on what age you buy life insurance, because if you buy it before you have the test, even the day before, they can't change it on you. It's not like, and that may be just a misunderstanding from people. So I've got Senator Hardy I saw first, and then Senator Brock.
Yeah, I also think it's supposed to, the bill, one of the intents of the bill is to protect people who may get genetic testing at a young age.
Yes.
Way before they would be in the position where they might be buying life insurance. So the whole like fix of you can buy life insurance today and get genetic testing tomorrow is really not a fix, because there could be a, 10 or 12-year-old who needs genetic testing for some reason. And that just isn't, doesn't work for that demographic.
So Senator Brock.
Well, the one thing that struck me in the testimony that I heard was that it doesn't have an impact on life insurance that is currently in force. It's only on policies that are issued by that issuer later. But what it does have that affects the person is long-term care insurance, because long-term care insurance, the prices can vary annually. And so it could have a very direct effect on someone who at some point gets genetic testing that's unfavorable, that will affect a long-term care insurance policy, even if it's previously owned. So that to me is a bit concerning.
Yeah, I think the bottom line is insurance. It's an actuarial, balance, and that if the cost goes up because this generation took out a couple $1 million policies and, then died or kept things, you can't give an accurate assessment if you don't know. But it will fall to the next group, except in the long-term care. So it might benefit us, but it will raise the cost for the next generation of purchasers, because that's what the actuarial numbers will say it's going to cost you. So the question is, how much protection, if you have a 12-year-old child with genetic testing, that's probably going to be in their medical records. And so do we want, how much of the medical record do we want to have allowed into the underwriting? Right now, they can't require a genetic test. They can use family history, and they can use, Damien, I may be wrong on this one, they can use a genetic test if it is part of the medical record. So if I've, not just that I went out and got one done, but that if my doctor sent me and it's put into my medical record, I think they can use that now. Is that right, Damien?
So right now, the statute provides that you cannot condition or underwrite insurance on a basis of a requirement that an individual undergo genetic testing or the results of genetic testing of a member of the individual's family. So that's our current law. You can't require someone to get a genetic test, and you can't base the underwriting on the results of genetic testing. What this law does is it adds any genetic information of the individual that might be associated with a condition, but hasn't resulted in a diagnosis in the individual.
Okay.
So in other words, a predisposition to condition X, but I haven't actually been diagnosed with that. And then it expands the restriction on family members from just genetic testing to their genetic information, which includes the results of genetic testing plus the manifestation of a disease or disorder in a family member.
Okay, so if I had a mother and 3 sisters who had come down with ovarian cancer, I'm hoping I would have told my doctor that, and it would be in my medical record. That would be excluded from what could be considered in
that would be included now in the definition of genetic information, and the policies of insurance could no longer be underwritten or conditioned on the basis of that genetic information. Similarly, if, for example, let's say your mother had family members with a condition, and it's a condition that skips a generation or could be a recessive sort of condition, that genetic information, that's also considered part of your relative's genetic information. So it's more than just the individual filing for the insurance, it's the genetic information of their family too. So you can't.
Whereas before we just would have said, they always ask, is anyone in your family had colon cancer? Is anybody in your family got heart disease? So now, if that person died of colon cancer, but their cousin got a test or their brother said they had a test and there was a predisposition, we couldn't know that you had a brother or 3 brothers that had colon cancer or prostate cancer.
Yeah, that's right. The exception in this bill is for life insurance. And for life insurance, it says that you can take into account family medical history, including the manifestation of a disease or disorder that has a genetic tie.
Okay.
But just for life insurance, and if you move forward this bill, that language would need to be clarified because it's in one section, but not in others that apply to
Others.
life insurance. And that was Emily Brown's testimony.
Yeah, and I think that's would make the life or the insurers more comfortable if they could not lose what they already have, which is the ability to look at family history, even if there's been no genetic testing.
Right. So, and that the bill in front of you only provides that for life insurers. So long-term care and disability income replacement, both of those would be in the boat of not being able to do any genetic information related to an individual or their family member.
Okay. And I know with long-term care, because that does raise all of our rates, and there have been, I got a whole series of emails from a gentleman, I think last year, who had his premium go up 100%. He was upset, but it was based on usage. And in long-term care, the one Alzheimer's that they do have a genetic link to is early onset. And so if your mother or your father and your sister all came down with Alzheimer's at 55, and you're probably going to live, for 10 to 20 years, that definitely tips the balance in the cost of long-term care insurance, and either that person's going to pay it or everybody's going to pay it when they underwrite it. So those are I'm not sure what goes with disability, but I'm sure there's some. But if you put the family history in, because there's a family history, whether or not there's been a genetic test. Thoughts?
I guess I don't know if it makes total sense, but the family history seems more straightforward. It's predictive, but it's sort of blatantly predictive at some level that I feel like a DNA test is not. And I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's a real policy distinction there, but I guess
we could probably say family history of manifest disease, excluding any DNA tests that have not manifested themselves in the family. I mean, there's a proclivity for in DNA, but other than one or two things, it's not guaranteed,
right,
until it is. But a family history, especially if it's more than one close relatives, and that's always been allowed. So to take that out is really taking something away. And we want people to be able to afford to buy life insurance and disability and long-term care. Otherwise, the state's going to pay.
Are we talking about something that's in the original bill, or is it in one of the proposed amendments from DFR?
Health and welfare added that family history, but only to the life insurance section. And I think, Ruth, wasn't that like as we were getting set to vote it out?
That was 2 years ago. So it was before I was on the committee.
I was probably the aunt at the picnic talking about the cost of insurance, which is my usual role.
I wasn't there, so I don't know.
It was added by health and welfare. And I think it was like the final markup, maybe to get some votes.
Yeah, it was just before the pandemic.
Yeah.
So I was in ag.
So but it wasn't something we spent a lot of souls or, time on. I think it was like, okay, we'll do family history. Yeah. And it got put in.
So is it already in this bill or you're just
It's in
identifying?
this bill for life insurance.
Yeah, it's from the bottom of page 3 to the top of page 4 in the bill.
Okay.
And it's a carve out in section 3 of the bill. What Emily Brown from DFR pointed out helpfully is that in section 4 of the bill, this applies to all forms of insurance. And likewise, section 2 of the bill applies to all forms of insurance in the state. So for clarity in the law, it would make sense to put that carve out in both of those places as well. If you don't intend to change anything about the intent of the bill, but you just want to make the bill read better and make the law more clear if the bill goes forward, then that would be the change to make, because that clarifies a potential point of misunderstanding in the law, where if you read two separate laws that apply to the same insurers, they seem to say different things.
Okay. You have a section by section, right, Damien?
I do. I sent it to the committee a little while back. I can send it
maybe
again.
Faith, maybe Faith can put that up. Faith, can you share it?
It's posted.
It's
I
posted.
can share my screen if that's helpful.
Yeah,
or-
that I think, and then we can all.
Sure, let me pull it up and I
I've
will
got
share my
this- yeah,
screen.
section by section is here.
Yep. Oh, and of course, this is when my internet slows down, so.
They've all been slow. Don't like wind.
Okay. And great. And I have a side-by-side of the existing law versus the bill as well, if that's helpful.
That would be helpful, I think.
Which would you prefer?
I think the side by side, so we know what is
Okay.
and what
Great.
is
Let me
changing, and then
pull
we
that
can
up.
decide what will be.
Okay.
We saw this once before. Okay.
Hold on, let me stop that share and just. I have issues with this when I do it on my split screen here. So let me do that again. Great, can everybody see that?
Yes, there it is.
Okay, so.
I can see
in-
it's there. I'm not sure I can really read it. Is there-
Make it a little larger.
Sure.
Okay,
How's
yeah,
that?
I
Better?
think that works. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think you can essentially get everything, and that's about as big as I can make it before it goes off my screen.
Okay.
So the section 1 there, you see that what we're doing is defining what genetic information means. So it includes the results of genetic testing. And then we're also adding or the manifestation of a disease or disorder in a family member of the individual. So that means that when you're getting to an individual's genetic information, it includes their family members' disease history, provided there's a genetic connection there.
Oh, so if
Or really just their disease history. So yeah. So this
so
family medical
it doesn't have to be as a result of my mother never had to have a genetic test, but the fact that or my sisters or anyone else, but the fact that 3 generations of my family had a certain cancer would be left out.
Yeah, so B is really getting into the family medical history issue.
Okay.
But it's important to note this is just a definition section, but when you see genetic information used later in this bill, everything refers back to this definition of genetic information.
Okay.
So
Matt, can I ask a question?
Yes.
It was.
I can't see you, so you have to holler.
That's okay. Damien, this was the thing that was brought up yesterday or whenever it was when we did this bill last time. That was someone, I can't remember, had a concern about this because it was really broad.
Mhm.
It
And-
is broad.
Yeah, and
Yes.
this is the one that conforms with Gina, but only for health insurance at this
Right.
point. Okay,
Yeah, well, so this is a definition.
Right.
So what this bill doesn't affect Gina per se, but it brings our law in line with Gina. But it basically brings the requirements of our law with respect to other types of insurance that aren't covered by Gina in line with Gina. So you're getting the
Right.
same restrictions on the use
Okay.
of genetic information with respect now to life, disability, long-term care, and potentially other forms of insurance. I'm not the insurance expert, so
Right.
But that was the thing that was identified as a concern, that it was maybe too broad. So what if we just got rid of B? Would that?
That would do it.
Well, so if you get rid of B, your definition of genetic information becomes the results of genetic testing related to an individual or family member of the individual. So what your law then says is you can't underwrite a policy of insurance on or condition it on the basis of a requirement that an individual undergo genetic testing. That's existing law.
Mhm.
Or genetic information of the individual that may be associated with a potential genetic condition in that individual, but that has not resulted in a diagnosed condition in the individual. And then the genetic information of a member of the individual's family. So already the existing law says you can't condition insurance on the results of genetic testing of a member of the individual's family. So really what this would be doing then is we'd be saying you can't require genetic testing, and then you can't condition it based on the results of genetic testing of that individual or a member of their family or a member of their family's family, if that makes sense.
Right.
But then
Unless the disease, I mean, that makes sense as long as if the disease has manifested itself, that's the family history you get now.
right. So what this law, the biggest change in this bill is that it takes family medical history that could show a genetic disorder out of the consideration for underwriting purposes. So
Right. It takes, but almost any, given the speed of genetics and what it's, keeps being able to predict more and more, it basically says you can't use any family history because, even if it's a manifested disease, right? How do you know if the disease is part of a genetic condition?
right. So yeah, you can't use a family history of getting that disease.
Right.
Whether we've found a definitive tie or not to genetics with a particular disease, you couldn't take a look at someone's family medical history and say, oh, wow, 3 people have gotten that cancer.
Right.
You can't do that under the proposed language in the bill. Under
So
the
Damien,
existing, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Did you want to finish? I'm sorry.
I was going to say, under the existing law, what you're looking at is the existing law just limits you to, so the existing law says you just can't require the individual to get a genetic test or look at the genetic tests of their family members. If you take the family medical history out of the bill, the only thing you're really adding to that is you can't look at the individual's genetic tests or extended family genetic tests. You could look at that family medical history. So,
Okay, so I think the intent, like looking at, was to not exclude family history. And so how do we not exclude family?
So we do that. We do that in section 3, and we do it just for life insurance. And it's this language here in C. And I apologize if this is as eye-searingly yellow on your screens as it is on mine.
Very yellow.
So I'll choose a better color next time.
Could we do that for others? Because I think I'm trying to find the letter from Jason Williams where.
Sure, I've got the email from Jason Williams.
There was one that came last night. I had Faith send to everybody.
Yeah, and it's on our website too.
Yeah.
It was not our intent in seeking this legislation to prohibit the use of family medical history documented in an individual's medical record in underwriting long-term care or disability. So that's all of them. And if they're saying that, and that's sort of the current law, I would suggest we not make that change and, be as more modest myself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Agreed. So I was just trying to figure out how we do that.
Well, Jamie and I think can figure that out. What I think we want to say is you can't tell anyone they have to have a genetic test as a condition of getting any of these insurance. You can't use the result of any genetic testing unless it has manifested itself in a disease. And that includes the family history of disease. It's not that they got tested and found out that they might get this disease. They did. And which is pretty much the present situation, except I think we're saying you can't use genetic testing from any family member.
But isn't what it says early on in the original definition, when you add that subparagraph B, that in effect having a family member having had the disease is by definition genetic information.
Right.
Right.
And that's what we need to take out.
Yep. And so what C, which I've highlighted here to soften the yellow, says is that a life insurance company can condition insurance rates or other conditions of insurance on the individual's family medical history, including the manifestation of a disease or disorder in one or more family members, provided that there's a relationship between the medical history and the cost of the insurance risk that the insurer would assume by insuring the individual, which is what the actuaries are already doing anyway when they look at that. They're
pretty sure
Why
this
would
came from
limit
the
it
insurance
to
company.
life insurance and not also deal with long-term care insurance?
So I think that was I think that's the thing that both Jason Williams and Emily Brown have said, is that this is something that's used in those other lines of insurance. And you can read their words for yourself. I don't want to paraphrase and misquote them. But so that we could very easily just say, so there's really two options here. One is we could take family medical history out of the definition of genetic information, or we could write in section 2, we need to add the carve out because this applies to all lines of insurance. So we could add that for life, long-term care, and disability. And then in this section 3 applies just to life insurance. So we don't need to specify long-term care or disability. Section 4, this section applies to all forms of insurance. So we would need to, again, carve out life, long-term care, and disability. And then sections 5 and 6, you're getting into, well, section 5 is HMOs, but section 6, you're getting into long-term care. So we would have to do the carve out specifically for long-term care. And then when you get into section 7, 8, and 9, you're getting into genetic discrimination, not insurance policies.
Okay, so if we just took out family medical history from the definition of genetic information, and then put that you can consider the family history in all three insurance companies?
So it's really an either or option. So if you just taking it out of the definition,
okay,
would it impact other lines of insurance as well? And I am not the person to speak to you about what the potential impacts and pros and cons of that are, but you would be impacting lines of insurance beyond life, disability, and long-term care. If you just include the carve out for those 3 lines of insurance, then you're limiting the exception to those. So I would defer to the advocates and experts that you've heard from on which of those approaches is advisable, whether it should be the limited carve out for life, long-term care, and disability, or whether it should be taking that language out entirely with respect to insurance, knowing that GINA already already prohibits that at the federal level for health insurance.
Right, and we don't underwrite health insurance in this state anyway.
Right, so it's just the other forms of insurance that we're worried about here. And so the question really is, are there concerns about other lines of insurance using family medical history potentially in the future that they want to prohibit? Or was this, when we drafted it, did we just not need to include that language to accomplish the goal? And I can't speak to that.
Can you send a query to Jason and Jill and see? Just ask them, what would the committee's going to do one or the other of these? What would you prefer?
Sure. Do you want me to include Emily Brown on that as well?
Yes, whoever you think should hear this, because we're running out of time. And if I get, everybody back in here for another afternoon, we're going to spend another afternoon. So I'd like to just, if we're all, and I think I'm hearing we're all agreed that we are going to take family history, manifested diseases out of the definition of, or still be allowed for underwriting at least these 3 insurance policies. What's the best way to do it? Because maybe Jason Williams knows if we take family history out of the definition at the top, we may be impacting something else, and we may impact another.
Yeah.
If there's a family history of insanity, maybe you don't want to do an excess line insurance for somebody to do bungee jumping off something. I don't know. But
okay, I can send them the query and just ask them to. I can either forward their responses to the committee or ask them to respond directly to the committee.
Tell them to just respond. If they send it to me or to Faith, I'll send it to Faith. It will get it.
Just a question as far as carve out is concerned. Is it better to put the carve out and make it specific to long-term care, disability, and so on? Or would it be better to simply say coverage other than medical insurance?
Well, that's what we don't know.
Well, that's the point, is maybe something that ought to be there that we don't even know about, and we're leaving a blank. That's what I'm trying to get at. It's just a question.
Yeah, I think this is a good question for the advocates who know more about the implications of this than I do.
So maybe we'll invite Emily Brown and Jason back in. And maybe Jill was with life insurance. There was another attorney that was here.
Yeah, I'm trying to
This
remember.
is an
I
S-
haven't caught all of the testimony, so
Yeah,
maybe I can work with Faith.
yeah.
And
Well, if we just
draft
send
up the
one
two
to
options and
Jason and to Emily and say, this is what the committee wants to do. Is there anything else, any unanticipated impacts? Which way to do this is preferable? Change the definition or expand the carve out? And is there anything we haven't anticipated that would happen by doing either one of those things? And that should get us the information. And if they really are upset, we'll have them in. Just tell Faith they're really upset. And we'll find time next week to get everybody in, all right?
Yeah, I will send that email to them over the weekend here, and
Thank
hopefully
you.
we'll get some answers.
Monday will do. Oh, Monday's a holiday too.
Monday is a holiday, so.
Oh, people have holidays.
And I think we're scheduled to be back on this. Let's just see. I know Faith has already booked me next Thursday. So.
Okay, well, we should get the answer by Thursday then.
Yeah, so I'll make sure it goes out by Tuesday morning.
Okay.
I'm hoping they're taking weekends too.
Okay.
So, and get the answer. Yeah.
And Senator Hardy.
I was just going to ask, just for expediency, if they both agree, can you come back with a draft so we can?
Well, that's what I was just about to ask you.
Okay. Just so we can check this one off our list.
Get it
Absolutely. Absolutely. I
Okay.
think both changes are simple. So it'll be once we have, assuming they agree, once we have agreement, it'll be quick to do it.
Okay. Okay, committee. Thank you. We voted out a bill. Senator McDonald. You're muted, Senator.
Before we adjourn, I wanted to, I appreciated the presentation on the income tax for schools, and I hope we have a chance to continue that. And I didn't get a chance to say that as we wrapped up. So I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Okay. All right, committee. Thank you. Have a good long weekend for those that are having one. We'll see you back here on Tuesday.